Sometimes the most extraordinary moments happen when we least expect them. Picture this. You're lying in a hospital bed, fighting the biggest battle of your life, when suddenly, the person who walks through your door isn't just another doctor or nurse. It's someone whose face you've seen on coins, newspapers, and television screens your entire life. But here's the twist. This isn't a formal royal visit with cameras and protocols. This is raw, real, and completely unscripted. What happens when a cheeky cancer patient decides to treat a future king like just another person? What unfolds when royal protocol meets hospital humor? And when genuine human connection breaks through the barriers of titles and tradition? This is the story of Sarah Mitchell, a 34-year-old teacher who never imagined her cancer diagnosis would lead to the most memorable conversation of her life. In a world where we often feel disconnected from those in power, where royalty seems distant and untouchable, one woman's irreverent spirit and refusal to be intimidated created a moment of pure human connection that neither she nor Prince William would ever forget. This isn't just a story about meeting royalty. It's about finding laughter in the darkest moments, discovering that compassion knows no boundaries, and learning that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply be yourself. Get ready for a journey that will make you laugh, cry, and believe in the power of authentic human connection, even in the most unlikely circumstances. Sarah Mitchell had always been the type of person who could find humor in the most unlikely situations. At 34, she taught Year 6 students at Millbrook Primary School in Surrey, and her classroom was known throughout the school for its infectious laughter and creative chaos. Her students adored her quick wit and ability to turn even the most mundane math lesson into an adventure. But nothing could have prepared her for the adventure that was about to unfold in the sterile corridors of St. Bartholomew's Hospital. The diagnosis had come 3 months earlier on a Tuesday morning that started like any other. Sarah had been complaining about persistent fatigue and some unusual bruising that wouldn't heal properly. Her GP, Dr. Reynolds, had initially suggested stress from her demanding teaching schedule, but something about her symptoms nagged at him. The blood test that followed revealed what no one wanted to hear: acute lymphoblastic leukemia. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She remembered sitting in the small consultation room, staring at Dr. Reynolds' concerned face while he explained treatment protocols and survival rates. The medical jargon seemed to float around her head without really landing. All she could think about was her Year 6 class and how she was supposed to tell a room full of 11-year-olds that their favorite teacher might not be coming back next term. But Sarah's characteristic humor kicked in even during that devastating moment. When Dr. Reynolds finished his explanation and asked if she had any questions, she looked at him seriously and said, "Well, this certainly puts my bad hair day into perspective." The doctor's startled laugh broke some of the tension, and Sarah knew then that if she was going to fight this battle, she was going to do it on her own terms. The chemotherapy treatments at St. Bartholomew's had become a routine over the past 2 months. Sarah had nicknamed the oncology ward Club Paradise because, as she told her nurses, if you're going to lose your hair and feel terrible, you might as well pretend you're at an exclusive resort. She had developed a reputation among the staff for her irreverent comments and ability to lighten the mood even during the most difficult procedures. Her favorite nurse, Maria Santos, had become something of a co-conspirator in Sarah's mission to keep spirits high. Maria was a 40-something mother of 3 who had been working in oncology for over a decade. She had seen every type of patient response to cancer treatment, from complete denial to overwhelming despair, but Sarah's determined optimism was something special. You know, Maria would often say while preparing Sarah's for, most patients complain about the hospital food, the uncomfortable beds, or the early morning blood draws. You complain that the hospital gowns don't come in more fashionable colors. Sarah's response was always immediate. I mean, who decided that mint green was a healing color? Give me some deep purple or maybe a nice royal blue. Something with a bit of personality. Little did she know how prophetic her color preferences would prove to be. The treatment schedule meant that Sarah spent significant time in the hospital, often staying overnight for observation after particularly intensive chemotherapy sessions. Her room had become a sort of informal gathering place for other patients, nurses, and occasionally doctors who found themselves drawn to her infectious spirit. She had decorated the small space with cards from her students, funny photographs, and a collection of colorful scarves that she wore instead of the standard hospital head coverings. One wall was covered with get-well cards from her Year 6 class. The children had clearly been instructed to make them cheerful, but their individual personalities shone through in unexpected ways. Little Tommy Morrison had drawn a picture of Sarah teaching a class of stick figures, with a speech bubble saying, "Cancer is just another word problem we need to solve." Emma Chan had created an elaborate card with glitter and ribbons that proclaimed, "Miss Mitchell is tougher than times tables." These cards meant everything to Sarah. They reminded her why she was fighting so hard to get better. Each colorful crayon stroke and carefully formed letter represented a future she was determined to reclaim. Teaching wasn't just her profession. It was her passion, her purpose, and her anchor during the storm of treatment. On this particular Thursday morning in late November, Sarah was scheduled for what her oncologist, Dr. Patricia Hawkins, called a check-in appointment. These sessions involved blood work, a physical examination, and discussions about how she was responding to the current treatment protocol. Sarah had learned to prepare for these appointments by coming armed with questions written on colorful sticky notes, and at least 3 new jokes to share with the medical staff. The November weather outside was typical for London, gray, drizzly, and thoroughly uninspiring. Sarah had arrived at the hospital early, partly because she was naturally punctual and partly because she genuinely enjoyed chatting with the various staff members who had become like family to her over the past few months. She knew the names of the security guards, the cafeteria workers, and even the cleaning staff who worked her floor. As she settled into her room to wait for Dr. Hawkins, Sarah pulled out her latest project, a scarf she was knitting for Maria's youngest daughter. The bright yellow yarn was a stark contrast to the muted hospital colors, and the rhythmic motion of the knitting needles helped calm her nerves before appointments. She had taken up knitting during her second week of treatment, initially as a way to keep her hands busy during long chemotherapy sessions, but it had quickly become a meditative practice that helped her process the emotional ups and downs of her cancer journey. The scarf was nearly finished, and Sarah was particularly proud of the intricate cable pattern she had managed to master despite the occasional brain fog that came with her medication. She had always been crafty. Her classroom was legendary for its elaborate art projects and seasonal decorations, but cancer treatment had given her more time to explore creative pursuits she had always meant to try. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message from her best friend, Jenny Crawford, who taught Year 3 at the same school. "How's our warrior princess doing today? Conquered any medical equipment lately?" Jenny's messages always managed to strike the perfect balance between checking in and maintaining normalcy. She had been Sarah's anchor to the outside world throughout treatment, providing updates about school gossip, student antics, and the general chaos that Sarah missed terribly. Sarah typed back quickly, "Currently intimidating my knitting needles and planning my next stand-up routine for the medical staff. Dr. Hawkins has no idea what she's in for today." She included a photo of her nearly completed scarf and added, "Almost ready to open my own boutique. Think chemo chic has market potential." Jenny's response was immediate. "You're absolutely ridiculous, and I love you for it. The kids are making you another batch of cards today. Fair warning, Marcus insisted on including a drawing of you fighting cancer with a lightsaber." The mental image of herself as a Jedi warrior made Sarah laugh out loud, which caught the attention of David, the young orderly who was passing in the hallway. David was barely 22, fresh out of his healthcare training program, and still adjusting to the emotional intensity of working in an oncology ward. Sarah had taken him under her wing, partly because his nervous energy reminded her of her more anxious students. "Everything all right, Miss Mitchell?" David asked, poking his head into the room. His concern was genuine, which made Sarah's heart warm. The young man had confided in her the previous week that working with cancer patients was more emotionally challenging than he had expected, and Sarah had spent considerable time reassuring him that finding moments of joy and laughter wasn't disrespectful to the seriousness of their situations. "Just planning world domination through knitwear, David," Sarah replied, holding up her colorful scarf. "Would you like to be my first customer? I'm thinking of branching out into superhero capes next." David's relieved smile told her that he was beginning to understand what she had tried to teach him about finding lightness even in difficult circumstances. "I think you'd make an excellent superhero, Miss Mitchell. What would your power be?" Sarah considered this seriously, as she did all questions from young people. "The ability to make people laugh even when they don't want to. It's not flying or super strength, but it's pretty useful in hospitals." Their conversation was interrupted by a gentle knock on the doorframe. Dr. Hawkins entered with her usual warm smile, carrying Sarah's chart and looking characteristically professional in her white coat. Dr. Hawkins was in her early 50s, with graying hair that she wore in a practical bun and eyes that conveyed both intelligence and compassion. She had been Sarah's primary oncologist since the diagnosis, and the two women had developed a relationship built on mutual respect and shared dry humor. "Good morning, Sarah," Dr. Hawkins said, settling into the chair next to the bed. "I see you're terrorizing our staff again with your cheerfulness." David looks particularly traumatized. "It's all part of my therapy," Sarah replied solemnly. "I figure if I can't cure my own cancer through positive thinking, I can at least give everyone else diabetes through excessive sweetness." Dr. Hawkins laughed, which was exactly the response Sarah had been hoping for. These small victories, making her medical team smile, creating moments of lightness in their demanding days, had become as important to Sarah as her actual treatment milestones. As Dr. Hawkins began reviewing Sarah's latest test results, Sarah found herself feeling unusually nervous. There was something about this appointment that felt different, though she couldn't put her finger on exactly what. The blood work had been routine, her recent scans had shown continued improvement, and her physical symptoms had been manageable. Yet something in the air felt charged with possibility, as if the universe was preparing to shift in some significant way. She had learned to trust these intuitive feelings during her cancer journey. The disease had stripped away many of the surface distractions of normal life and left her more attuned to subtler energies and emotions. It wasn't mystical exactly, more like developing better emotional hearing after years of living in a noisy world. "Your numbers continue to look very encouraging," Dr. Hawkins was saying, pulling Sarah back to the present moment. "The latest round of treatment seems to be working exactly as we hoped. I'm particularly pleased with how your white cell count has stabilized." Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her. Each good report felt like a small victory, a step closer to the life she was fighting to reclaim. But even as she celebrated this news, that strange sense of anticipation continued to hum beneath the surface of her consciousness. Unknown to Sarah, just 3 floors above in the hospital's administrative offices, a completely separate set of events was unfolding that would soon intersect with her Thursday morning appointment in the most unexpected way possible. The collision of her ordinary cancer treatment day with extraordinary circumstances was about to create a memory that would sustain her through the remaining challenges of her treatment and beyond. But for now, Sarah simply smiled at Dr. Hawkins' positive report and prepared to face whatever the rest of the day might bring, armed with her knitting, her humor, and her unshakable determination to find joy even in the most unlikely places. 3 floors above Sarah's cheerful room, the executive conference room of St. Bartholomew's Hospital was buzzing with nervous energy. Hospital Administrator Margaret Thornton stood at the head of a polished oak table, addressing a group of senior staff members who looked varying degrees of excited and terrified. The cause of their collective anxiety was a phone call that had come in 2 hours earlier from Kensington Palace. "Ladies and gentlemen," Margaret announced, her voice carrying the authority that had made her one of the most respected hospital administrators in London, "we have approximately 4 hours to prepare for an unscheduled royal visit. His Royal Highness Prince William will be arriving this afternoon for what his private secretary described as an informal walkabout through our oncology and pediatric wards. The room erupted in a carefully controlled chaos of questions and concerns. Dr. James Morrison, the chief of oncology, raised his hand first. Margaret, what exactly does informal mean in royal terms? Are we talking about a full security sweep, media presence, or something more low-key? Margaret consulted her hastily scrawled notes. According to the palace, this is not an official engagement. No media, minimal security presence, and absolutely no advance publicity. The prince apparently expressed a personal desire to visit with patients and staff without the usual formal protocols. Nurse manager Elizabeth Harper, a woman who had been at St. Bartholomew's for over 20 years, looked skeptical. In my experience, there's no such thing as an informal royal visit. What's the real story here? The real story, though none of them knew it yet, was both simpler and more complex than they might have imagined. Prince William had been having a particularly challenging week dealing with formal engagements, ribbon cuttings, and ceremonial duties that, while important, sometimes left him feeling disconnected from the real-world impact of his public role. After attending yet another formal charity gala the previous evening, he had found himself wondering about the actual patients and families whose lives were affected by the organizations he supported. On impulse that morning, William had asked his private secretary to arrange a completely unofficial visit to a London hospital. No photographers, no prepared speeches, no carefully vetted interactions. Just an opportunity to spend time with people facing real challenges without the barrier of royal protocol. St. Bartholomew's had been chosen because of its excellent reputation and because the prince had previously supported several cancer research initiatives there. Back in the conference room, the practical implications of hosting an impromptu royal visitor were becoming clear. Security would need to be coordinated, though kept minimal. Staff would need to be briefed about appropriate protocols while maintaining the informal atmosphere the prince had specifically requested. Most importantly, patients would need to be informed without creating unnecessary stress or excitement that might interfere with their medical care. I suggest we focus on the oncology ward, DR. Morrison said thoughtfully. Our patient population there tends to be adult, articulate, and, honestly, they've already dealt with bigger challenges than meeting royalty. Plus, many of them have expressed appreciation for the prince's work with cancer charities. Margaret nodded approvingly. James Morrison's practical approach was exactly what they needed. Excellent point. Elizabeth, can you work with the oncology nursing staff to identify patients who might be comfortable with an informal visit? We want people who won't be overwhelmed, but who might genuinely benefit from the interaction. Elizabeth was already making mental notes. After 2 decades in nursing, she had developed an intuitive sense for matching patients with visitors, volunteers, and experiences that would genuinely lift their spirits rather than add stress to their already complicated lives. Several patients immediately came to mind, but one name stood out clearly: Sarah Mitchell. Sarah's reputation on the ward was legendary. In just 2 months, she had become an unofficial morale booster for both patients and staff. Her quick wit, genuine warmth, and absolute refusal to let cancer dampen her spirit made her someone who could probably handle meeting royalty with the same grace and humor she brought to everything else. More importantly, Elizabeth suspected that Sarah might be exactly the type of authentic interaction the prince was seeking. I have a few patients in mind, Elizabeth said carefully, but I want to be very clear with them about what this is and what it isn't. No one should feel pressure to participate, and everyone needs to understand that this is meant to be a normal conversation, not a formal audience. Dr. Morrison looked relieved. Perfect. And from a medical perspective, I want to ensure that anyone who participates is having a stable day, treatment-wise. No one who's dealing with acute symptoms or who might be feeling particularly unwell. As the meeting continued, Sarah remained blissfully unaware of the planning session happening above her head. She had finished her appointment with Dr. Hawkins and was now settled back in her room for observation following her morning blood draw. The good news about her test results had put her in an exceptionally cheerful mood, and She was working on a crossword puzzle that someone had left in the patient's lounge. Maria Santos appeared in her doorway, looking slightly flustered but trying to maintain her usual calm demeanor. Over the past 2 months, Maria had become expert at reading Sarah's moods and energy levels, and today she could see that her favorite patient was having a particularly good day. "Sarah, honey, do you have a few minutes to chat about something unusual?" Maria asked, settling into the familiar chair beside the bed. Sarah looked up from her crossword puzzle with interest. In her experience, unusual conversations with medical staff could go either way, but Maria's expression suggested this was more intriguing than concerning. "Let me guess," Sarah said with a grin. "They want me to participate in a medical study about the therapeutic effects of terrible hospital television programming. I've been taking detailed notes about the daytime talk shows, and I think I've cracked the code for curing depression through strategic remote control usage." Maria laughed despite her nervous energy. "Not quite, though I'm sure your research would be valuable. This is something completely different. We've just learned that we're going to have a very special visitor this afternoon, and we're wondering if you'd be interested in meeting him." Sarah's eyebrows raised with curiosity. "Define special visitor. Are we talking about a celebrity, a politician, or someone's incredibly charming grandfather who happens to tell amazing stories?" "Well," Maria said slowly, "he's definitely charming, and he does tell good stories from what I understand. It's Prince William." The crossword puzzle fell forgotten onto Sarah's lap. She stared at Maria for a long moment, processing this information. Her first instinct was to assume this was some kind of elaborate joke, but Maria's expression was entirely serious. "You're telling me that the Prince of Wales wants to visit a cancer ward on a random Thursday afternoon?" Sarah asked, her voice climbing slightly in pitch. "And furthermore, you're asking if I want to meet him? Are there hidden cameras somewhere? Is this some sort of bizarre reality show I accidentally signed up for?" Maria shook her head, smiling at Sarah's characteristic response. "Apparently, it's not an official visit. No media, no big production. His people described it as an informal walkabout where he can actually talk to patients and staff without all the usual royal protocol." Sarah considered this information seriously. Her natural inclination was to find the humor in any situation, but something about this felt different. The idea of meeting a member of the royal family was certainly surreal, but what intrigued her more was the apparent genuineness of the visit. An informal interaction suggested someone who actually wanted to connect with people rather than fulfill a ceremonial obligation. "What exactly would this involve?" Sarah asked practically. "Am I supposed to curtsy? Practice my accent? Pretend I know anything about polo or fox hunting?" "That's exactly the point," Maria explained. "They specifically said they want normal conversations with real people. No special preparations, no formal protocols. Just be yourself." Sarah burst into laughter. "Be myself? Have they met me? I'm the woman who asked Dr. Hawkins if chemotherapy came in different flavors and suggested that hospital gowns should have pockets for snacks. Are they sure they want me to be myself?" "Absolutely," Maria said firmly. "You're exactly the kind of person who might make this meaningful for him. Think about it, Sarah. How many people does he meet who treat him like a normal human being instead of a royal figure?" The question struck Sarah as surprisingly profound. She had never really thought about the royal family as individuals who might crave authentic human connection. In her mind, they had always existed in a separate world of palaces and protocols surrounded by people who told them what they wanted to hear. The idea that someone in that position might actually seek out genuine conversation was both touching and slightly sad. "When you put it that way," Sarah said thoughtfully, "I suppose I could manage to treat a prince like just another person. After all, I've had plenty of practice treating doctors, nurses, and hospital administrators like regular human beings despite their fancy titles." Maria grinned. "That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say. The visit is scheduled for about 3 o'clock this afternoon. Nothing formal, probably just a brief chat about how you're doing, what your experience has been like here, that sort of thing." Sarah glanced at the clock on her bedside table. It was just past noon, which gave her a few hours to prepare mentally for what was undoubtedly going to be the most unusual conversation of her life. Her natural performer's instincts were already kicking in, but she forced herself to resist the urge to rehearse responses or plan witty remarks. If this was meant to be authentic, then authenticity was exactly what she would provide. "All right," Sarah said decisively, "I'm in. But I have one condition." Maria looked slightly worried. "What's that?" "I'm not changing out of my favorite scarf," Sarah declared, gesturing to the bright purple and gold creation she had wrapped around her head that morning. If Prince William wants to meet real cancer patients, he can meet one who refuses to let fashion standards be dictated by medical circumstances. Maria's relieved laughter filled the room. "I think that's exactly perfect." As word of the impending royal visit began to spread discreetly through the oncology ward, a sense of subdued excitement began to build among both staff and patients. Unlike the usual buzz that accompanied celebrity hospital visits, this felt different. There is something about the informal nature of the visit that made it feel more like anticipating the arrival of an old friend rather than a distant public figure. Sarah spent the next hour finishing her crossword puzzle and chatting with other patients who wandered by her room. Word had gotten out about the upcoming visit, and several people stopped by to share their own thoughts about meeting royalty. Most were excited, but nervous, while a few expressed skepticism about the whole enterprise. "I just hope he doesn't expect us to pretend everything is wonderful," said Margaret Thompson, a 60-year-old retired teacher who was receiving treatment for breast cancer. "I mean, I appreciate the gesture, but I'm not going to sugarcoat what this experience is really like just to make a prince feel comfortable." Sarah nodded appreciatively. "That's exactly right. If he wants authentic conversations, then he gets authentic conversations. Cancer isn't pretty or convenient, and it doesn't pause for royal visits." But as Sarah continued to think about the approaching encounter, she found herself feeling increasingly curious about the person behind the title. What drove someone who could spend their afternoon doing almost anything to choose a hospital visit? What did he hope to gain from these conversations? And what could she possibly offer that would be meaningful to someone with his experiences and responsibilities? These questions occupied her thoughts as the clock ticked toward 3 o'clock, and the most unexpected chapter of her cancer journey began to unfold. At exactly 3:15 in the afternoon, Sarah heard the subtle change in the hospital's atmosphere that indicated something significant was happening. The usual background noise of medical equipment, staff conversations, and patient movements seemed to quiet slightly, replaced by a sense of focused attention that could only mean one thing. Their royal visitor had arrived. Sarah was sitting cross-legged on her hospital bed, having abandoned any pretense of looking particularly sick or fragile. She had spent the last hour in conversation with her roommate, Mrs. Chun, an elderly woman receiving treatment for lung cancer, who had regaled Sarah with stories of raising 5 children while working as a seamstress in London's East End. Mrs. Chun had announced her intention to ask Prince William about his own children, declaring that anyone with small children would understand the particular exhaustion that comes with parenting, regardless of their other responsibilities. The sound of approaching footsteps in the corridor caused both women to fall silent. Sarah felt her heart rate increase slightly, not from nervousness exactly, but from the sheer surreal nature of what was about to happen. In all the scenarios she had imagined for her cancer treatment journey, meeting a member of the royal family had never made the list. Elizabeth Harper appeared in the doorway, accompanied by a tall man in a navy blue sweater and dark jeans who looked remarkably normal and surprisingly relaxed. Sarah's first thought was that Prince William looked exactly like his photographs, but somehow more substantial, more present than she had expected. His smile appeared genuine rather than practiced, and his eyes held the kind of focused attention that suggested he was actually interested in being here. "Sarah," Elizabeth said with a warm smile, "I'd like you to meet Prince William." "William, this is Sarah Mitchell, one of our favorite patients, and the woman I was telling you about." Prince William stepped forward with an extended hand and a smile that immediately put Sarah at ease. "It's wonderful to meet you, Sarah. Elizabeth tells me you're a teacher and that you've been keeping everyone's spirits up around here." Sarah shook his hand firmly, noting that his grip was warm and confident. "Well, Someone has to keep these medical professionals from taking themselves too seriously, she replied with a grin. It's practically a public service. The prince's laugh was immediate and genuine, which told Sarah that her instincts had been correct about treating him like a normal person. I imagine they need someone to keep them honest. How are you feeling today? Honestly, Sarah said, settling back into a comfortable position on her bed. I'm having a pretty good day. My blood work came back with encouraging results this morning. I finished a crossword puzzle without cheating, and now I'm having the most unusual conversation of my life. Not bad for Thursday. Prince William pulled up the chair that had been occupied by various medical staff throughout the day and sat down with the casual ease of someone settling in for a real conversation. I have to say, this is probably the most unusual Thursday afternoon I've had in quite a while, too. Tell me about your teaching. What year do you work with? Sarah's face lit up immediately. Talking about her students was always guaranteed to energize her, even on her most challenging treatment days. Year 6, which means I spend my days with 11-year-olds who are convinced they know everything about the world and are just waiting for adults to catch up. They're absolutely brilliant and completely exhausting. That sounds like my children on their best days, William replied with evident affection. George is getting to that age where he questions everything and has very strong opinions about how the world should work. Smart kid, Sarah said approvingly. The ones who question everything are usually the ones who end up changing the world, though they're also the ones who drive their teachers slightly insane in the process. Mrs. Chun, who had been listening to this exchange with obvious delight, decided to join the conversation. Your Highness, how do you manage with 3 little ones? I raised 5 children, and I thought I was going to lose my mind most days. Prince William turned to include Mrs. Chun in the conversation with natural grace. Honestly, I don't know how you manage 5. 3 feels like barely controlled chaos most of the time. Catherine and I are constantly amazed by parents who juggle multiple children and make it look easy. The secret, Mrs. Chun said conspiratorially, is accepting that your house will never be truly clean again and that sometimes dinner is going to be toast and jam because everyone is too tired to cook properly. Sarah burst into laughter. Mrs. Chun speaks the truth about organized chaos. My classroom operates on similar principles. I've learned that the best lessons often happen when you throw the lesson plan out the window and follow the children's curiosity instead. That's actually excellent advice for royal engagements, too, William said with a wry smile. Some of my most meaningful conversations happen when we abandon the official schedule and just see where the day takes us. Like today, actually, the easy flow of conversation struck Sarah as remarkable. Here was someone who could literally go anywhere and meet anyone, choosing to spend his Thursday afternoon in a cancer ward talking about the challenges of keeping children entertained and houses tidy. There was something deeply human about the choice that she found unexpectedly moving. Can I ask you something that might be slightly inappropriate? Sarah said, her natural directness kicking in. William looked intrigued rather than concerned. I suspect most of the best questions are slightly inappropriate. Go ahead. What made you want to do this kind of visit? I mean, really, you could be anywhere today, doing anything you wanted. Why choose to hang out in a hospital with a bunch of cancer patients? The question seemed to genuinely surprise William, not because it was inappropriate, but because it was so direct. Sarah could see him considering his response carefully, and she appreciated that he didn't immediately give what sounded like a prepared answer. Honestly, he said after a moment, I spent a lot of time in formal settings talking to people who tell me what they think I want to hear. Not because they're being dishonest, but because that's how these interactions usually work. I wanted to have some real conversations with people facing actual challenges to understand what matters to real people in difficult circumstances. Sarah nodded appreciatively. That makes sense. Though I have to warn you, if you wanted someone to tell you what you want to hear, you've come to the wrong place. I'm constitutionally incapable of filtering my thoughts, even for royalty. Perfect, William said with evident relief. What I really want to know is what this experience has been like for you. Not the medical details necessarily, but how it's changed your perspective on things. The question was more thoughtful than Sarah had expected, and she found herself considering it seriously? That's actually a really good question. I think the biggest thing is that cancer strips away a lot of the stuff that doesn't matter and leaves you with what's really important. Before my diagnosis, I worried about all kinds of things that seem completely ridiculous now. Like what? William asked, leaning forward slightly. Like whether my hair looked perfect, or whether I had the right clothes for school events, or what other people might think about my teaching methods. Now I worry about whether I'll be healthy enough to see my students graduate, whether I'm making the most of every good day I have, and how I can help other people going through similar experiences. Mrs. Chun nodded vigorously. Exactly right. When you face something like cancer, you realize how much energy you were wasting on things that don't actually matter. William was quiet for a moment, clearly processing what they had shared. That's a profound way to look at it. Do you find that perspective helpful? Or does it make things more difficult? Sarah considered this carefully. Both, actually. It's helpful because it makes decisions easier. When you know what really matters, it's simpler to prioritize your time and energy. But it's also difficult because you realize how much time you might have wasted before, and you want to make sure you don't waste any more. Plus, she added with a grin, it gives you license to be completely honest with people, even when they might not expect it. Cancer patients get away with saying things that would be considered rude in normal circumstances. Such as, William asked, clearly amused. Well, for instance, I can tell you that your security detail has been standing in the hallway, looking increasingly nervous for the past 20 minutes. And I suspect they're worried you're enjoying this conversation too much to stick to whatever schedule they had planned. William laughed and glanced toward the doorway, where indeed a man in a dark suit was visible, trying to look inconspicuous. You're absolutely right. They're probably calculating exactly how far behind schedule I am and wondering whether they need to intervene. Are you supposed to be somewhere else? Sarah asked practically, not specifically. They just worry when I stay in one place too long without checking in. It's an occupational hazard of their job. Sarah made a decision that surprised even her. Why don't you tell them you need another 15 minutes for a proper conversation? If they're worried about security, they can come stand in the room and listen to us discuss the finer points of hospital food and knitting techniques. The suggestion was so practical and so completely without deference that William found himself laughing again. You know what? That's exactly what I'm going to do. He stood up and walked to the doorway, where he had a brief, quiet conversation with the security detail. Sarah couldn't hear the specifics, but she could see the moment when the men realized that their principal was not ready to leave and that they would need to adjust accordingly. When William returned to his seat, he looked more relaxed than he had since arriving. Crisis averted. Now, you mentioned knitting techniques, and I have to admit I'm curious. Is it something you took up during treatment? Sarah reached for the bag beside her bed and pulled out her current project, a partially completed baby blanket in soft blue and white stripes. Started it during my second week of chemo. Turns out that knitting is perfect for chemotherapy sessions because it keeps your hands busy, gives your mind something to focus on, and produces something useful at the end. That's beautiful work, Williams said, examining the intricate pattern. Who's it for? Maria, my favorite nurse, just found out she's going to be a grandmother. Her daughter is due in the spring, and I figured every baby needs a blanket made with love and slightly chaotic good intentions. The simple generosity of the gesture struck William as emblematic of everything he had observed about Sarah in their short conversation. Here was someone facing her own serious health challenges who had chosen to spend her time and energy creating something beautiful for someone else's joy. That's an incredible gift, he said sincerely. Both the blanket and the thought behind it. Sarah shrugged with characteristic modesty. It's just knitting, but Maria has taken such good care of me, and honestly, it feels good to be able to do something for someone else when you're used to being the one receiving care all the time. Mrs. Chun had been listening to this exchange with obvious approval. That's exactly right, she said firmly. When you're sick, everyone wants to take care of you, but sometimes you need to take care of other people to remember who you really are. The wisdom in that statement settled over the room like a gentle blessing. William found himself thinking about his own role and responsibilities, about the balance between accepting support and providing it, between being served and serving others. "That's beautifully put," he said to Mrs. Chun, then turned back to Sarah. "It sounds like you've built quite a community here." "The best kind," Sarah agreed. "Based on absolutely nothing except the fact that we're all going through something difficult, and we've decided to help each other through it. No requirements, no applications, just showing up and being honest about what we need and what we can offer." As their conversation continued, Sarah realized that something remarkable was happening. What had started as a surreal encounter with royalty had evolved into exactly what Prince William had apparently been seeking: a genuine human connection with people facing real challenges. The formal distance that usually surrounded such interactions had completely dissolved, replaced by the kind of authentic conversation that she might have with any thoughtful person who was genuinely interested in understanding her experience. It was, she reflected, exactly the kind of connection that made everything else worthwhile. As their conversation deepened, Sarah noticed that Prince William seemed to genuinely relax in a way that suggested he didn't often get to have discussions like this. His questions became more personal and thoughtful, moving beyond polite inquiries into territory that felt authentically curious about her experience and perspectives. "Can I ask you about the teaching aspect?" William said, settling more comfortably in his chair. "How has being away from your students affected you? That seems like it would be one of the hardest parts of treatment." Sarah's expression immediately grew more serious. This was the question that cut closest to the heart of her daily struggle. "It's honestly the worst part," she admitted. "Worse than the chemotherapy, worse than losing my hair, worse than feeling sick all the time. Those kids are used to having me there every day, being part of their daily routine, helping them navigate their problems and celebrate their successes." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "They're at such a crucial age. Year 6 is when they're transitioning from being little kids to becoming teenagers. They're dealing with friendship drama, academic pressure, family issues, and all those big questions about who they want to become. I feel like I'm missing this incredibly important time in their development." Mrs. Chun reached over and patted Sarah's hand supportively. "You're not missing it, dear. You're just experiencing it differently." "Mrs. Chun is right," William said thoughtfully. "Your influence on those children goes beyond just being physically present in the classroom. They're learning about resilience, about facing challenges with grace, about maintaining your sense of humor, even when things are difficult. Those are lessons that will serve them for the rest of their lives." Sarah looked at him with surprise. "I hadn't thought about it that way. I've been so focused on what I'm not able to give them that I haven't considered what they might be learning from this experience." "Think about it," William continued. "How many children get to see an adult they care about handle a serious challenge with such courage and humor? They're watching you fight for your health while still caring about other people, still creating beautiful things, still finding reasons to laugh every day. That's an incredible education." The insight struck Sarah as profound and unexpectedly comforting. She had been viewing her absence from the classroom as a failure, a way of letting her students down when they needed her most. But William's perspective suggested that her battle with cancer might actually be teaching them something valuable about human resilience and the importance of maintaining hope even in difficult circumstances. "Jenny, my best friend who teaches at the same school, has been sending me updates about how the children are handling everything," Sarah said slowly. "She says they've become incredibly supportive of each other in ways she's never seen before. When one student is having a difficult day, others automatically step in to help without being asked." "That sounds like they learned that from watching you," William observed. "Children pick up much more than we realize about how to treat other people, especially from adults they admire." Maria Santos appeared in the doorway, clearly surprised to find the conversation still in progress. She had expected a brief, formal interaction and had come to check whether Prince William needed anything or was ready to move on to other patients. "I'm so sorry to interrupt," Maria said, "but I wanted to make sure everything was going well and see if you needed anything." "Actually," Sarah said with a mischievous grin, "perfect timing. William, meet Maria, the nurse I was telling you about." Maria, This is Prince William, and he was just telling us about the challenges of parenting small children." Maria looked slightly stunned to be drawn into the conversation so casually, but William immediately stood and extended his hand with obvious warmth. "It's wonderful to meet you, Maria. Sarah has told me about the baby blanket she's making for your grandchild. Congratulations, by the way." Maria's professional composure melted into a grandmother's pride. "Thank you so much, Your Highness. Yes, my daughter is due in April, and we're all very excited. Sarah's been working on that blanket for weeks, even during her chemotherapy sessions. She showed it to me," William said. "It's absolutely beautiful. What a special gift for your family." The natural way William engaged with Maria struck Sarah as remarkable. There was no condescension, no sense that he was performing charity by acknowledging a working nurse. He spoke to Maria exactly as he had been speaking to Sarah and Mrs. Chun, with genuine interest and respect. "Maria," Sarah said, "you should tell William about your theory regarding hospital coffee and patient recovery rates." Maria laughed, her nervousness completely forgotten. "Oh, well, I've always believed that there's a direct correlation between the quality of hospital coffee and how quickly patients heal. The worse the coffee, the faster people want to get out of here." William's delighted laughter filled the room. "That's brilliant. Have you presented this research to hospital administration?" "I keep threatening to," Maria replied with a grin. "But they're probably afraid I'll demand they install a proper espresso machine in every ward." "That seems like a reasonable request," William said seriously. "I'll make a note to mention it to someone important." The easy humor and genuine warmth of the interaction was unlike anything Maria had experienced in her 20-plus years of nursing. She had met celebrities and dignitaries before during their hospital visits, but those encounters had always felt formal and slightly awkward. This felt like having a conversation with an old friend who happened to hold an interesting job. "Your Highness," Mrs. Chin said from her bed, "can I ask you something that's been bothering me?" "Of course," William replied, turning his attention to her with the same focused interest he had shown everyone else. "All these articles in the papers about your family, about your children, about your marriage. How do you deal with having your private life discussed by complete strangers all the time? It would drive me absolutely mad." The question was exactly the kind of direct inquiry that protocol usually prevented, but William answered it with apparent appreciation for Mrs. Chen's straightforwardness. "It is incredibly difficult sometimes," he admitted, "especially when it comes to the children. Catherine and I work very hard to give them as normal a childhood as possible, but it's challenging when every family outing might end up as a headline in the newspapers." "That must be exhausting," Sarah said sympathetically. "I complain about the school gossip network, but at least my personal life isn't front-page news." "The hardest part," William continued, "is helping the children understand why some people are so interested in their lives when they're just trying to be kids. George is starting to ask questions about why photographers want to take pictures of him eating ice cream." "What do you tell him?" Maria asked, genuinely curious. "We try to explain that some people are interested in our family because of the job I do, but that doesn't mean they get to decide how we live our lives. It's a balance between acknowledging the public interest and maintaining our privacy and dignity as a family." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "That's actually similar to what we deal with as teachers, though on a much smaller scale. Parents and administrators and sometimes even other children want to know everything about your personal life, but you have to maintain boundaries while still being open and authentic with the kids." "Exactly," William said with evident relief at being understood. "It's about finding ways to be genuine and accessible while still protecting the parts of your life that need to remain private." The conversation was interrupted by a gentle knock on the doorframe. A young man in a dark suit appeared, looking apologetic but determined. "Sir, I'm very sorry, but we really do need to move along. There's several other patients who are hoping to meet you, and we have that commitment at 5:30. William looked genuinely reluctant to leave, which struck everyone in the room as remarkable. Here was someone whose time was extraordinarily valuable and carefully managed, and He seemed genuinely disappointed to end a conversation with cancer patients in a hospital room. Of course, he said, standing up but not immediately moving toward the door. Before I go, though, I want to ask you something, Sarah. Sarah looked at him expectantly. You mentioned that cancer has helped you focus on what really matters. What would you say to someone who wanted to gain that clarity without having to go through such a difficult experience? The question was clearly important to him, and Sarah took a moment to consider her answer carefully. I think the key is to regularly ask yourself what you would regret not doing if you only had a limited amount of time left, she said slowly. Not in a morbid way, but as a way of checking whether you're spending your energy on things that actually matter to you. She paused, then continued with characteristic directness. And honestly, stop caring so much about what other people think. Most of their opinions about your life aren't based on complete information anyway, and their approval won't matter when you're looking back on how you spent your time. That's excellent advice, William said sincerely. Thank you for that. Plus, Sarah added with a grin, if you ever want to practice having conversations with people who will tell you exactly what they think, you're always welcome to come back and chat with us. We're not going anywhere for a while. The invitation was so warmly genuine and completely without expectation that William found himself deeply moved. These women had welcomed him into their lives during one of their most challenging periods, shared their wisdom and humor with him, and asked for nothing in return except authentic conversation. I would genuinely love that, he said, and everyone in the room could tell that he meant it completely. As he prepared to leave, William shook hands with each of them again, but the farewells felt more like the end of a visit with friends rather than the conclusion of a formal royal engagement. Mrs. Chun pressed a small origami crane into his hand that she had folded from a piece of magazine paper. Maria hugged him with motherly warmth, and Sarah gave him a firm handshake and a reminder to keep asking the good questions. As Prince William left their room, accompanied by his quietly relieved security detail, the three women sat in companionable silence for several minutes, processing what had just occurred. Well, Sarah finally said, that was definitely not what I expected when I woke up this morning. Lovely young man, Mrs. Chun observed approvatively. Good father, I think. Asks the right questions and listens to the answers. Maria shook her head in amazement. In all my years of nursing, I have never had a conversation like that with someone so important. He made it feel like we were the interesting ones. Sarah picked up her knitting needles and resumed work on the baby blanket, but her mind was still processing the remarkable interaction they had shared. What struck her most was not that she had met a prince, but that she had connected with another human being who was genuinely seeking to understand how people navigate difficult circumstances with grace and humor. It was, she reflected, exactly the kind of meaningful encounter that made all the challenges of her cancer journey feel worthwhile. She had been able to offer something valuable to someone who could probably have anything he wanted, and in return, she had gained a new perspective on her own experience and influence. As the afternoon light began to fade outside her hospital room window, Sarah felt profoundly grateful for the unexpected gift of authentic human connection in the most unlikely of circumstances. 2 weeks after Prince William's visit, Sarah was sitting in her classroom for the first time in 3 months, surrounded by 28 excited 11-year-olds who were buzzing with questions, stories, and barely contained energy. Her treatment schedule had improved enough that she could return to teaching part-time, starting with 3 days a week and building back up to full-time as her strength returned. The children had decorated the classroom with welcome back banners, flowers made from construction paper, and a large card signed by every student in the school. But what struck Sarah most was how they had changed during her absence. There was a maturity in their interactions with each other, a kindness and awareness that she hadn't seen before. They helped each other with assignments without being asked, shared supplies automatically, and included classmates who might otherwise have been left out. Miss Mitchell, Emma Chun said during their morning meeting, "We have something important to tell you." Sarah looked around the circle of eager faces, noting how they seemed more focused and serious than she remembered. "I'm listening." Tommy Morrison, usually one of her most restless students, raised his hand. While you were sick, we learned that taking care of each other is more important than being the smartest or the funniest or the most popular. And we learned that being brave doesn't mean you're not scared," added Lucy Peterson. "It means you do the right thing even when you are scared." Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes as she realized that William had been absolutely right. Her battle with cancer had taught her students lessons that no curriculum could provide. They had learned about resilience, compassion, and the importance of supporting each other through difficult times. "You've all grown so much," Sarah said softly. "I'm incredibly proud of the people you're becoming." "Miss Mitchell," Marcus Thompson said, consulting a piece of paper he had obviously prepared, "we want to start a kindness project for other kids who have sick teachers or family members." Jenny's mom said we could organize it through the school. The initiative was entirely their own creation, born from their experience of watching someone they cared about face a serious challenge. They wanted to create care packages for children in similar situations, including books, art supplies, and handwritten notes of encouragement. "That's a brilliant idea," Sarah said, her heart full of pride in their compassion and initiative. "Tell me more about how you want to organize it." As her students enthusiastically outlined their plans for the Kindness Project, Sarah reflected on how profoundly her cancer journey had changed not just her own perspective, but the lives of everyone around her. The ripple effects of facing adversity with humor and grace had spread far beyond her hospital room. Her phone buzzed with a text message, and she glanced down to see a message from an unknown number. "Hope your return to teaching is going wonderfully. Your students are lucky to have you back. Best wishes, W." Sarah smiled, recognizing that Prince William had somehow gotten her contact information and wanted to check on her progress. She quickly typed back, "First day back completed successfully. The kids have organized a kindness project that would make you proud. Thank you for helping me see the bigger picture." The response came within minutes. "That sounds exactly like something they would do after learning from you. Would love to hear more about the project sometime. Take care of yourself." The exchange reminded Sarah of something important that had emerged from their conversation in the hospital. Her influence extended far beyond what she could see or measure. Every interaction, every choice about how to respond to challenges, every moment of choosing humor over despair or connection over isolation created ripples that touched other lives in ways she might never fully understand. Over the following months, Sarah's health continued to improve steadily. The Kindness Project her students had initiated grew into a school-wide program that eventually spread to other schools in their district. Children across Surrey were learning that they could make a meaningful difference in the lives of others who were facing difficult circumstances simply by offering friendship, encouragement, and practical support. Maria's granddaughter was born in early April, and the baby blanket Sarah had knitted became a treasured family heirloom. Maria brought photos to show Sarah during one of her follow-up appointments, and they both marveled at how something created during chemotherapy sessions had become a symbol of love and hope for a new generation. Mrs. Chun completed her treatment successfully and returned home to her 5 children and 13 grandchildren who had been inspired by her stories about Sarah and Prince William to organize their own family kindness initiatives. The origami crane she had given to Prince William during his visit had prompted him to learn more about the Japanese tradition of folding 1,000 cranes for good fortune, which he later incorporated into a children's charity initiative. 6 months after the royal visit, Sarah received an unexpected phone call from Kensington Palace. Prince William's private secretary explained that the prince had been so moved by his conversation with Sarah and the other patients that he wanted to establish a new charitable initiative focused on supporting the emotional and psychological well-being of cancer patients and their families. His Royal Highness was particularly struck by your insights about the importance of maintaining connections and finding meaning during treatment, the private secretary explained. He wondered if you might be interested in serving as an advisor for the program. The invitation was both flattering and daunting. Sarah's first instinct was to question whether she had anything valuable to contribute to such an important initiative. But then she remembered her conversation with William about focusing on what really mattered and not worrying so much about other people's opinions. "I'd be honored to help," she told the private secretary. "But I have one condition." There was a brief pause before the response. "Of course. What would that be?" "I want to make sure that any program we develop keeps the focus on authentic human connection rather than formal charitable structures. The most healing thing about my experience wasn't the medical treatment, as important as that was. It was the genuine care and friendship I received from people who treated me like a whole person rather than just a cancer patient." "That's exactly the approach His Royal Highness had in mind," came the delighted response. The charitable initiative that eventually emerged from this collaboration became a model for cancer support programs across the United Kingdom. Rather than focusing solely on medical care or financial assistance, it emphasized the importance of maintaining social connections, creative expression, and opportunities for patients to contribute meaningfully to their communities even during treatment. Sarah found herself traveling to hospitals across the country, training staff and volunteers in approaches that honored the full humanity of patients rather than defining them primarily by their illness. The work was deeply fulfilling and gave her a sense of purpose that transcended her own recovery. 2 years after their first meeting, Prince William made another unofficial visit to St. Bartholomew's Hospital, this time specifically to see how the new support programs were working in practice. Sarah was there to give him a tour of the expanded patient services, which now included art therapy rooms, a library of books written by patients about their experiences, and a mentorship program that connected newly diagnosed patients with others who had successfully completed treatment. "This is remarkable," William said as they walked through the renovated ward. "It feels completely different from most hospital environments. That's because we designed it around the principle that healing involves much more than just treating disease," Sarah explained. "People need to feel valued, connected, and hopeful. They need opportunities to give as well as receive support. Most importantly, they need to be seen as complex human beings with rich inner lives, not just medical cases." They paused in front of a wall covered with photographs, artwork, and written reflections from patients who had participated in the program. The diversity of experiences and perspectives was striking, but common themes emerged around the importance of humor, creativity, and authentic relationships in navigating serious illness. "Look at this," Sarah said, pointing to a photograph of an elderly man teaching origami to a group of children in the pediatric ward. "Mr. Patterson is receiving treatment for prostate cancer, but twice a week he comes up here to teach paper folding. He says it helps him feel useful and connected to something larger than his own situation." William studied the photograph thoughtfully. Mrs. Chun would approve. She'd probably want to learn some new techniques from him. The mention of Mrs. Chun brought back fond memories of their original conversation. "She's doing wonderfully, by the way. Completely cancer-free for over a year now, and still making origami cranes for anyone who visits her house." As they continued their tour, Sarah reflected on how much her life had changed since that unexpected Thursday afternoon encounter. Her cancer was in full remission. Her teaching career had evolved to include training other educators and supporting students through family crises, and she had discovered a passion for healthcare advocacy that she never could have imagined. But perhaps most importantly, she had learned that the most profound healing often comes from authentic human connection. Her conversation with Prince William had reminded her that everyone, regardless of their title or circumstances, craves genuine understanding and acceptance. The charitable work that had grown from their meeting was simply an extension of that basic human need for connection and meaning. "Can I ask you something?" Sarah said as they concluded their tour. "Of course," William replied. "Do you remember what you said about wanting to have real conversations with people facing actual challenges? Has this kind of work helped you find more of those opportunities?" William considered the question seriously. "Absolutely. This program has shown me that the most meaningful part of my role isn't the ceremonial aspects or the formal engagements. It's the chance to connect with people who are navigating difficult circumstances and to help create systems that support them more effectively. That's exactly what teaching taught me too," Sarah said with a smile. "The real work isn't delivering curriculum or managing behavior. It's seeing each student as a complete person with their own struggles and dreams and helping them develop the confidence and skills they need to thrive. As Prince William prepared to leave, he paused to shake Sarah's hand one final time. "Thank you," he said simply, "for being exactly who you are, for challenging me to think differently, and for helping create something that's making a real difference in people's lives." "Thank you," Sarah replied, "for asking the right questions, for listening to the answers, and for proving that authentic leadership means being willing to be changed by the people you serve." Their handshake felt like the conclusion of one chapter and the beginning of another. What had started as an unexpected encounter between a cheeky cancer patient and a curious prince had evolved into a lasting friendship and a charitable initiative that would impact thousands of lives. As Sarah watched Prince William leave the hospital, surrounded by a security detail, but carrying himself with the relaxed confidence of someone who had found meaningful work, she felt profoundly grateful for the unpredictable journey that had brought them together. Her cancer diagnosis had initially felt like a devastating interruption to her carefully planned life. But it had actually been the beginning of a deeper, more purposeful chapter that she never could have imagined. Sometimes, Sarah reflected, the most extraordinary transformations begin with the most ordinary courage. The decision to face whatever life brings with humor, honesty, and an open heart. The late afternoon sun streamed through the hospital windows, illuminating the artwork created by patients and the photographs of people who had found hope and healing in unexpected places. Sarah picked up her knitting bag and headed home to her classroom preparations, grateful for every ordinary moment of her extraordinary, hard-won life.